The evening air carried the sweet melody of a string quartet through the open windows of the Thornfield estate. Richard Thornfield stood at the edge of his marble terrace, watching his birthday guests mingle in the garden below. At 42, he had everything money could buy: a tech empire worth billions, homes in 7 countries, and enough cars to change vehicles every day for a month. Yet as he sipped his champagne, a familiar emptiness gnawed at him. Another successful party. "Sir," said Howard, his house manager, appearing at his side with a fresh glass. Richard nodded but didn't smile. The same faces, the same conversations. I could recite what each person will say before they open their mouths. The string quartet finished their piece, and polite applause rippled through the crowd. Richard checked his watch, only 9 o'clock. 3 more hours of meaningless small talk stretched before him. "Is Mr. Zakarian here yet?" Richard asked, scanning the crowd for the pianist scheduled to perform at 10. Howard cleared his throat. "I was just coming to inform you, sir. Mr. Zakarian has fallen ill. Food poisoning, apparently. He sends his deepest regrets." Richard's jaw tightened. The pianist was the one part of the evening he had been looking forward to. Anton Zakarian was a rare talent, and Richard had paid a small fortune to have him perform tonight. "Wonderful," Richard muttered. "Now what will we do for entertainment?" "We could move straight to the fireworks, sir. At 9 o'clock? People will think I'm ending the party early." Richard drained his glass. "No, we need something else." Just then, Olivia Chen, the daughter of one of Richard's business partners, approached the piano that had been set up on the patio. She was in her 20s, beautiful and accomplished, the kind of woman Richard's friends were always trying to set him up with. "May I?" she called out to Richard, gesturing to the piano. Richard waved his hand in permission, and she began to play a simple melody, pleasant enough but nothing special. As he watched her fingers move across the keys, an idea sparked in his mind. The kind of wild idea that only came to him when he was utterly bored. "Howard, gather everyone on the patio," Richard said suddenly, his eyes lighting up. "I have an announcement to make." Howard looked concerned but knew better than to question his employer's whims. Within minutes, the 100 or so guests were gathered around the piano, champagne glasses in hand, curious about the unexpected gathering. Richard stepped forward, and the crowd hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to celebrate another year of my fascinating existence." This drew polite laughter. "As you know, I'm not one for traditional celebrations, and it seems even tonight's entertainment has decided to be unpredictable." He walked over to the piano and ran his fingers along its glossy surface. "This Steinway was my mother's. She was a brilliant pianist, not that I inherited any of her talent." More chuckles from the audience. "Music was her passion, and though I never mastered it myself, I've always had a deep appreciation for those who can truly move others through their playing." Richard paused, scanning the faces watching him. Some looked genuinely interested. Others were clearly just waiting for him to finish so they could return to their conversations. "I'm going to propose a little game," he continued, a mischievous smile spreading across his face. "As all of you know, I'm still unmarried at 42. My friends and family never tire of reminding me." This earned knowing laughs from several guests who had indeed tried to play matchmaker over the years. "So here's my proposal. I will marry whoever can master Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 within 3 months from today." A shocked silence fell over the crowd, followed by nervous laughter. Was he joking? "I'm completely serious," Richard said, reading their thoughts. Rachmaninoff's Third is considered one of the most technically challenging piano pieces ever written. It requires not just skill but soul. Anyone who can truly master it in 3 months deserves, well, me, he grinned, and of course access to my rather extensive resources. The crowd erupted in chatter. Richard's longtime friend Tom Baker pushed through to the front. "Rich, have you lost your mind?" he asked, half laughing, half concerned. "You can't just auction yourself off like this." "Why not?" Richard shrugged. "It's my life, my choice. And don't worry, I'll have proper contracts drawn up tomorrow. This isn't just talk." In the back of the crowd, Peter Willis, a music producer who had known Richard for years, called out, "You do realize you've just invited every gold digger with piano lessons to come after you, right?" Richard laughed. "That's where the challenge comes in, Peter. Rachmaninoff's Third isn't something you can fake your way through. It separates the truly passionate from the pretenders." He spread his arms wide. "So who wants to take on the challenge?" The guests looked at each other uncertainly. Some of the single women whispered among themselves, A few people pulled out their phones, presumably to look up just how difficult this piece really was. "Oh, come now," Richard prodded. "Surely there must be someone here willing to try." "Olivia, you play beautifully." Olivia Chen blushed. "Mr. Thornfield, that piece is, well, it's beyond most professional pianists. I couldn't possibly." 3 months is not nearly enough time, called out another guest, a music teacher, even for someone with experience. "That's part of the test," Richard replied, enjoying the stir he'd caused. "I'm not just looking for technical ability. I'm looking for determination, passion, the willingness to attempt the impossible." What Richard didn't see was Elena Vasquez, who had been cleaning in the adjacent room. She had paused her work when she heard the commotion, standing just out of sight behind a partially open door. At 35, Elena had been working for Richard's household for nearly 2 years, though they had barely exchanged more than brief greetings. Elena listened with widening eyes. Rachmaninoff's Third. She knew that piece well, or at least she once had, before life took her down a different path. Back on the patio, Tom was still trying to talk sense into Richard. "Even if someone manages it, which I doubt, you can't seriously intend to marry them." "Marriage isn't a game, Rich." Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I always keep my word, Tom, you know that. If someone meets my challenge, they'll get exactly what I've promised." He turned back to address the crowd. "The official competition will be held exactly 3 months from today, right here. I'll arrange for proper judges, the best in the world. No favoritism, no shortcuts." While the guests continued to buzz with excited conversation, Richard pulled Howard aside. "Contact my lawyers first thing in the morning. I want this all legally binding." Howard looked pained. "Sir, are you certain this is wise?" "Perhaps after you've slept on it." "I've never been more certain," Richard cut him off. "This party was dying, Howard. Now it's the most talked about event of the year." He clapped the older man on the shoulder, and who knows? Maybe I'll finally find someone worthy of my time. As the evening continued, Richard found himself the center of attention for once, not because of his money, but because of his outrageous proposal. People who had barely spoken to him all night now approached with questions and opinions. Some thought it was brilliant. Others called it insanity. Richard enjoyed every minute of it. Later, as the last guests departed around midnight, Richard lingered on his terrace, watching the garden lights reflect off the swimming pool. The house staff moved quietly through the rooms behind him, cleaning up the remnants of the party. "Was it worth it?" asked Tom, who had stayed behind. "All this chaos you've created?" Richard smiled, looking more relaxed than he had in months. "I was bored, Tom. Now I'm not." Tom shook his head. "And what happens when some piano prodigy actually shows up and wins your little contest? Have you thought that through?" "Then I'll finally have found someone interesting," Richard replied. "Someone with real passion and dedication. Isn't that what everyone says I need?" "There's more to marriage than admiring someone's piano skills," Tom pointed out. Richard laughed. "Let me worry about that if it happens, which, as everyone kept reminding me tonight, is highly unlikely." What neither of them knew was that Elena was still in the house, finishing her cleaning duties. As she wiped down the kitchen counters, her mind was elsewhere, back in a small music school in her hometown, where she had once been the star pupil. Back to the days before her family's financial troubles had forced her to set aside her dreams and take on whatever work she could find. She thought of the beautiful Steinway in Richard's music room, which she cleaned twice a week but had never dared to touch. And she thought of Rachmaninoff's Third, the mountain every serious pianist dreamed of conquering. "Impossible," she whispered to herself, setting aside the cleaning cloth. But even as she gathered her things to leave, a tiny spark had ignited inside her, a spark of possibility that refused to be extinguished. Elena's small apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rumble of traffic outside. It was nearly 2 in the morning, but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. She sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea gone cold beside her, staring at her hands that once danced across piano keys, but now spent their days scrubbing floors and wiping counters. "Mom, what are you still doing up?" Elena looked up to see her 16-year-old daughter, Lucia, standing in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I couldn't sleep," Elena said, forcing a smile. "Why are you awake?" "Heard you come in." Lucia yawned, dropping into the chair across from her mother. "How was the fancy party?" Any celebrities? Elena shook her head. Just rich people being rich. She paused, then added, The piano player canceled, though. That caused quite a stir. There was a piano. Did you play? Lucia asked eagerly. Of course not, Elena replied quickly. I was there to work, not perform. Lucia's face fell. You never play anymore. When would I have time? Elena gestured around their modest apartment. Between cleaning houses and my night shift at the hospital, I barely have time to sleep. You used to make time, Lucia said quietly. Remember when we first came here? You found that old piano at the community center. Elena remembered. 5 years ago, when they'd first arrived in the country, she would take Lucia to the community center after school. While Lucia did homework, Elena would play the out-of-tune upright piano in the corner of the recreation room. It wasn't much, but for 30 minutes 3 times a week she could lose herself in the music. That was before I picked up the hospital job, Elena said, rising to rinse her cup in the sink. Things are different now. They don't have to be, Lucia said, following her. I'm older now. I can help more. Maybe you could— It's late, Elena interrupted gently. You have school tomorrow. Lucia hesitated, then hugged her mother. I just miss hearing you play. You were so happy then. After Lucia returned to bed, Elena stood alone in the kitchen, her daughter's words echoing in her mind. Had she been happier then? Certainly life had been harder in many ways. They'd just arrived in a new country, money was even tighter and the future uncertain. But there had been music. Elena's thoughts drifted to Mr. Thornfield's outrageous challenge, Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto. She'd studied it briefly in music school before life took an unexpected turn. She remembered her teacher saying she had the technical skill, but lacked the emotional maturity to truly capture its essence. That was 15 years ago, she whispered to herself. On impulse, Elena opened her closet and reached for a box on the top shelf. Inside were remnants of her former life, old photographs, concert programs, and at the bottom, folded and yellowing, the sheet music for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. She spread the pages on the table, the familiar notes bringing back a flood of memories. Her fingers moved unconsciously, playing silent keys on the tabletop. This is crazy, she told herself. Even if I had a piano, I haven't seriously played in years. Yet the seed had been planted. The next morning, after Lucia left for school, Elena called her supervisor at the cleaning company. Is there any chance I could add an extra day at the Thornfield estate? She asked. Mr. Thornfield specifically requested you for tomorrow, her supervisor replied. Something about the party cleanup not being thorough enough. He wants you to come in the afternoon when he's out. Elena felt a flutter of panic. Had he seen her listening at the door? But no. If that were the case, she would probably be fired, not requested. The following day, Elena arrived at the Thornfield mansion with her usual cleaning supplies. But her mind was elsewhere. As she moved through the massive house, she kept glancing toward the music room where she knew the Steinway piano waited. After 2 hours of cleaning, she had worked her way to that wing of the house. Elena paused outside the music room door, listening carefully. The house was silent. Mr. Thornfield was out, and Howard, the house manager, was working in his office on the other side of the mansion. Heart pounding, Elena stepped into the music room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the gleaming black Steinway grand piano in the center of the room. She had dusted this piano dozens of times, but had never dared to touch the keys. Elena set down her cleaning supplies and approached the instrument slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. She ran her hand lightly over the polished surface, then carefully lifted the cover to reveal the keys beneath. Just 1 minute, she told herself, just to remember how it feels. She sat on the bench, adjusted her posture out of habit, and placed her hands above the keys. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. She started with a simple scale just to feel the action of the keys, but her fingers quickly remembered their old patterns. Before she knew it, she was playing the opening of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, major, the last piece she had mastered before giving up her studies. The sound was glorious, rich and resonant in a way the Community Center's old upright could never produce. Elena closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her. Her technique was rusty, and she fumbled a few passages, but the essence was still there. When she finished the piece, she sat in silence for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, without thinking, She turned to the opening movement of Rachmaninoff's Third. The famous opening theme, deceptively simple, flowed from her fingers. As the piece progressed and grew more complex, Elena struggled with the technical demands, but pushed through, lost in the attempt. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. I believe that's the first time anyone has played that piano since my mother died. Elena jumped up from the bench, nearly knocking it over. Richard Thornfield stood in the doorway watching her with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Thornfield, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have, I was just—" Elena stammered, horrified. "Taking a break from cleaning to play Rachmaninoff?" Richard finished for her, stepping into the room. "Interesting choice." Elena's face burned with embarrassment. "I'll get back to work right away. Please don't tell the agency. How long have you played?" Richard interrupted, moving closer to the piano. Elena hesitated. "I studied when I was younger, before I came to this country." "You were professionally trained," Richard observed. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elena admitted. "But that was many years ago." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Yet you chose Rachmaninoff's Third, the same piece from my challenge." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Were you at the party?" "I was cleaning in the next room," Elena explained. "I heard everything, but I wasn't eavesdropping, I promise." Richard laughed suddenly. "So you heard my ridiculous wager and thought you'd give it a try?" "No," Elena protested. "I was just remembering. I haven't touched a piano this beautiful in a very long time." Richard studied her for a moment, then gestured to the bench. "Play something else, sir." "Play something else," he repeated. "Something you know well." Elena slowly sat back down, her heart racing. After a moment's thought, she began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was a piece she had performed many times, one that lived in her muscle memory. As she played, she forgot about Richard standing there, forgot about her embarrassment, forgot about everything except the music. The final notes lingered in the air like a spell. "You have talent," Richard said quietly. Elena shook her head. "I had potential once. Now I have rusty fingers and forgotten techniques." "Yet you still play with feeling," Richard countered. "That's rare." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Elena stood up. "I should finish my work." "Wait," Richard said. "My challenge, are you interested?" Elena looked at him in surprise. "In competing? I couldn't possibly—" "Why not?" Richard asked. "You clearly have the background." "Mr. Thornfield, I haven't seriously played in 15 years. I work 2 jobs. I have a teenage daughter." Elena shook her head. "And even if by some miracle I could relearn the piece in 3 months, I'm not looking to marry anyone." Richard laughed again. "Fair enough. But the piano part of my challenge stands on its own. Anyone who can master that piece in 3 months has accomplished something remarkable." He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a key. "This room is usually locked when I'm not home. Howard has instructions not to let the staff in here." He held out the key to Elena. "I'm making an exception for you." Elena stared at the key. "I don't understand." "Practice," Richard said simply. "Whenever you're here cleaning. Take an hour, 2 hours, I don't care. The piano shouldn't sit silent." Elena didn't move. "Why would you do this?" Richard turned to look out the window. "My mother was a pianist. Not professionally, her family wouldn't allow it, but she played every day of her life until she got sick." He turned back to Elena. "Music should be played, not just admired from a distance. And talent shouldn't be wasted." Elena slowly took the key. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Richard said with a hint of his usual sharpness. "Rachmaninoff's Third has broken better pianists than either of us." As Elena returned to her cleaning duties, her mind was already racing ahead. Could she really do this? Relearn one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire while working 2 jobs and caring for Lucia? It seemed impossible. Yet as she worked, her fingers kept moving, playing invisible keys, remembering patterns from long ago. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of her old passion returning. That night, as she helped Lucia with homework, Elena asked hesitantly, "Do you still want me to play again?" Lucia looked up in surprise. "Always, why?" "I might have found a piano I can practice on," Elena said. "But it would mean some changes to our schedule. I might need your help more around the house." Lucia's face lit up. "Really? Where? When?" As Elena explained about the Steinway at the Thornfield mansion, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. hope. Not about winning some bizarre marriage contest, but about reclaiming a part of herself she had thought was gone forever. It's probably crazy, Elena concluded. I'm so out of practice. Lucia took her mother's hands. Your fingers remember, Mom. They always have. 3 weeks had passed since Richard had given Elena permission to play his mother's piano. What had begun as occasional sessions during her cleaning shifts had evolved into a dedicated routine. Elena now arrived at the Thornfield mansion an hour before her scheduled cleaning time, slipping into the music room with the key Richard had given her. Today, as she worked through a particularly challenging passage of the Rachmaninoff, frustration threatened to overwhelm her. Her fingers, once nimble and confident, now struggled with the complex fingering. She played the section again, then again, each attempt ending in the same stumble. You're rushing, came a voice from the doorway. Elena's hands froze over the keys. Richard stood there, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. She hadn't heard him come in. I thought you were in Tokyo until tomorrow, she said, quickly standing up. Meeting ended early, Richard replied, walking into the room. Don't stop on my account. Elena remained standing, suddenly aware of her worn jeans and faded t-shirt. She usually made sure to practice only when the house was empty. Please, Richard gestured to the bench. I'd like to hear how you're progressing. Hesitantly, Elena sat back down. I'm stuck on this section, she admitted. My fingers keep tangling. Show me, Richard said, surprising her by sitting on the edge of the bench beside her. Elena shifted to make room, uncomfortably aware of his expensive cologne and the contrast between his tailored suit and her simple clothes. She played the troublesome passage, ending with the same mistake. There, Richard pointed. You're anticipating the next movement. Your mind is racing ahead of your fingers. He demonstrated on the upper octaves, his own playing surprisingly competent. Try slowing down just here. Elena tried again, following his suggestion. The passage flowed more smoothly. Better. Richard nodded. You've made remarkable progress in just 3 weeks. I'm still far from performance level, Elena sighed. True, Richard agreed, his honesty refreshing rather than discouraging. But you've recovered years of technique in less than a month. That's no small feat. Elena glanced at the clock on the wall. I should start cleaning. I'm already behind schedule. Actually, Richard said, standing up, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Come with me. Puzzled, Elena followed him to his office. Richard gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I've spoken with your agency, he began, sitting across from her. I've arranged for you to be assigned exclusively to this house, with the understanding that half your time will be spent practicing. Elena stared at him. Why would you do that? Richard leaned back in his chair. I've had 17 people approach me about my challenge since the party. Music students, professionals, even a famous concert pianist who thought it would be amusing to win a husband as a publicity stunt. He made a dismissive gesture. None of them interest me. They see it as a competition, a chance for money or fame. Isn't that what you wanted? Elena asked. A competition? I wanted... Richard paused, seemingly searching for the right words. I wanted to be surprised, to find something real in this artificial world I live in. He fixed his gaze on her. When you play, even when you make mistakes, there's an authenticity that the others lack. I'm curious to see what will happen if you're given a real chance. Elena felt overwhelmed. This is too much. I can't accept it. It's not charity, Richard interrupted. Consider it a business arrangement. You'll still be paid your usual rate, but your duties are now divided between cleaning and practicing. In return, you'll perform at the competition. And if I win? Elena asked cautiously. Richard smiled. Then I'll keep my word as always. But something tells me you're not in this for a wealthy husband. Elena looked down at her hands. I'm in this for the music, she said quietly. I gave it up once. I never thought I'd get another chance. Then we understand each other. Richard nodded. You have 10 weeks left. Make them count. The new arrangement began the next day. Elena still cleaned the main areas of the house, but now spent 3 hours each day at the piano. After the first week, Richard brought in a piano teacher, a stern older woman named Mrs. Chen who had once taught at Juilliard. Your foundation is solid, Mrs. Chen told Elena after their first lesson, but you have years of bad habits to unlearn. We have much work to do. The lessons were grueling. Mrs. Chen accepted no excuses and demanded perfection. Elena's fingers ached at night, and there were moments when she wondered if she had taken on an impossible task. But each time she thought of giving up, she remembered Lucia's face lighting up when she heard her mother play again. Richard rarely attended the lessons, but he often found reasons to be in or near the music room when Elena practiced on her own. Sometimes he would listen silently from the doorway. Other times he would offer a suggestion or simply nod in approval before continuing on his way. One evening, about 6 weeks into her training, Elena arrived home to find Lucia waiting eagerly at the door. "Mom, you have to see this." Lucia pulled her to their small living room where a digital piano stood in the corner. Not a high-end model, but far better than anything they could afford. "What is this?" Elena gasped. "How did you—" "It was delivered this afternoon," Lucia explained excitedly. There was a note. She handed Elena a small card with Richard's distinctive handwriting. "For practice at home. Consider it an investment in the music." RT Elena sank onto the couch staring at the piano. "I can't accept this. Why not?" Lucia asked, sitting beside her. "He's helping you. Isn't that a good thing?" "It's complicated," Elena sighed. "Mr. Thornfield is not an ordinary employer." Lucia gave her mother a knowing look. "Is he handsome?" "Lucia!" Elena exclaimed. "That's not relevant." "So he is," Lucia grinned. "Is he nice?" Elena thought about it. Not exactly nice, but interesting, thoughtful in unexpected ways. "Like buying us a piano?" Lucia pressed. "Like noticing that I couldn't practice enough with only the hours at his house," Elena admitted. Later that night, after Lucia had gone to bed, Elena sat at the new piano, exploring its touch and sound. It wasn't a Steinway, but it was a quality instrument. She worked through the first movement of the concerto, no longer stumbling on passages that had given her trouble just weeks before. The next morning, she arrived at the Thornfield mansion determined to thank Richard properly, but also to establish boundaries. This arrangement was becoming too personal, too complicated. She found him in his home office on a video call. He held up a finger, asking her to wait, then wrapped up the call quickly. "You received the piano," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "Yes, and while I appreciate the gesture, I can't accept such an expensive gift," Elena said firmly. Richard leaned forward. "Do you know what separates truly exceptional musicians from merely good ones?" The question caught Elena off guard. "Talent, technique?" "Practice," Richard replied. "Consistent, focused practice. You can't do that with only 3 hours a day here." "Still," Elena insisted, "there are boundaries." "This isn't about boundaries," Richard interrupted. "It's about music. If you're serious about mastering this piece, you need the right tools." "Why does it matter so much to you?" Elena asked suddenly. "This whole competition was just a whim, something to liven up a boring party. Why invest so much in my playing?" Richard was silent for a long moment. "My mother wanted to be a concert pianist," he finally said. "She had the talent, the passion, everything except family support. Her parents made her give it up. Good girls from good families didn't pursue music careers." His expression darkened. "She married my father instead, had me, lived the life that was expected of her." He looked up at Elena. "She played that Steinway every day until she got sick. Not for an audience, just for herself. But there was always this sadness when she played Rachmaninoff, like she was touching something she'd lost." Elena understood then. "And you see the same thing in me?" "I see someone who deserves a second chance," Richard said simply. "Keep the piano. Consider it payment for entering my ridiculous contest." 2 more weeks passed. Elena's playing improved dramatically with the additional practice time at home. Mrs. Chen, though never effusive with praise, nodded more frequently during their lessons. "You might actually be ready," she told Elena after a particularly good session. Not perfect, but ready. Word had spread about Richard's unusual competition. Music magazines published articles about the Millionaire's Matrimonial Music Challenge, as one publication dubbed it. Professional pianists debated whether mastering such a difficult piece in 3 months was even possible. As the competition drew nearer, Richard began inviting small audiences to hear the other contestants play. Elena always made herself scarce during these sessions, continuing her cleaning duties in distant parts of the house, but she couldn't avoid hearing the music or the discussions afterward. Alexandra has the technical skill, but her interpretation lacks emotion. Richard told his friend Tom after one such session. Does it matter? Tom asked. You're not really going to marry any of these people, are you? I made a promise, Richard replied. If someone truly masters the piece, I'll keep my word. Elena, dusting in the hallway outside, froze when she heard Tom's next question. Even the cleaning lady? Come on, Rich, we both know this whole thing has gone too far. There was a pause before Richard answered, his voice cool. Elena has as much right to compete as anyone. More perhaps given what she's overcome to get this far. But marry her, someone from that background. The press would have a field day. I don't care about the press, Richard snapped. And neither should you. Elena moved away quickly, not wanting to hear more. That night, as she practiced at home, Tom's words kept echoing in her mind. Someone from that background. For the first time since beginning this journey, doubt crept in. What was she doing? Even if by some miracle she did win, then what? She had no interest in marrying Richard, or did she? She couldn't deny that their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee. There was respect there, perhaps even friendship. But marriage? To a man who lived in a different world? Who had created this whole situation on a whim? The next day, Elena arrived at the mansion resolved to withdraw from the competition. She would thank Richard for the opportunity and the piano, but end this charade before it went any further. She had reclaimed her music, that would have to be enough. She found Richard in the music room sitting at the piano, attempting the opening of the Rachmaninoff concerto with limited success. You're rushing, Elena said from the doorway, echoing his words from weeks ago. Richard looked up with a rare smile. Some of us aren't meant to play, just to listen. As Elena entered the room, ready to tell him her decision, Richard spoke first. I heard you practicing yesterday. The full first movement. His eyes held genuine admiration. It was extraordinary. Elena hesitated. Richard, I need to talk to you about the competition. I know what you're going to say, he replied, standing up. You're having doubts, wondering if this is all some elaborate game, isn't it? Elena asked quietly. Richard shook his head. Not anymore. The day of the competition arrived with perfect, early summer weather, clear, blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows of the Thornfield mansion. The grounds had been transformed for the event, with a stage set up on the main lawn and rows of white chairs arranged in a semicircle around it. A magnificent grand piano, even more impressive than Richard's mother's Steinway, dominated the center of the stage. Elena stood at her apartment window, watching the morning light spread across the city. She hadn't slept well. Today was the culmination of 3 months of intense work, of physical pain and emotional rediscovery. Whatever happened on that stage would mark the end of a chapter in her life, and possibly the beginning of a new one. Mom? Lucia appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her best outfit, a simple blue dress they had bought together last weekend. Are you ready? Elena turned from the window. As ready as I'll ever be. You're going to be amazing, Lucia said with absolute confidence. I've heard you practice. You've got this. Elena smiled at her daughter's certainty. There are 5 other contestants, all with more recent training than me. But none with your heart, Lucia countered. Mrs. Chen said so herself, it was true. At their final lesson yesterday, the usually reserved piano teacher had taken Elena's hands in hers and said, You play from somewhere deep. That cannot be taught. 2 hours later, Elena and Lucia arrived at the Thornfield estate. The place was buzzing with activity, catering staff setting up refreshment tables, sound engineers adjusting equipment, and early guests already milling about the grounds. Elena had never seen the mansion like this, filled with life and excitement. Howard met them at the side entrance. Away from the growing crowd, Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Thornfield asked me to show you to the preparation room. Your daughter can join the audience. We've reserved seats in the front row. Elena hugged Lucia. Good luck, Mom, the teenager whispered. Remember what you told me. Play for yourself, not for them. In the preparation room, normally Richard's library, Elena found the other 5 contestants. She recognized them from magazine articles and the practice sessions she had overheard. Alexandra, the conservatory graduate with flawless technique. William, the rising star who had been playing since age 3. Natalie, the music teacher with decades of experience. Victor, the professional pianist who had learned the piece years ago. And Grace, the young prodigy who had mastered the technical aspects of the piece with remarkable speed. They all looked up when Elena entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to dismissal. Alexandra, elegant in a formal black gown, raised an eyebrow. "You must be the housekeeper we've heard about," she said, her tone making the words more statement than question. "I'm Elena Vasquez," Elena replied simply, refusing to be intimidated. "I clean this house, yes. How?" "Unusual," Alexandra continued, "though I suppose anyone can enter a competition. Winning, of course, is another matter." William, kinder than Alexandra, offered Elena a seat. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Elena admitted with a small laugh. "Me too," he confided, "and I've been performing since I was a child. But this piece," he shook his head, "it's a monster." A staff member entered the room. "The judges have arrived. Mr. Thornfield asks that you all join him in the main hall for introductions." The 6 contestants followed the staff member through the mansion's corridors. Elena had cleaned these halls countless times, but now she walked them as a guest, a participant. It was disorienting. In the main hall, Richard waited with 3 distinguished-looking older people, 2 men and a woman. Elena recognized them immediately. Renowned concert pianists and musical directors whose names appeared frequently in the classical music magazines she had started reading again. Richard greeted each contestant, introducing them to the judges. When Elena's turn came, she was surprised when he took her hand and held it slightly longer than the others. "Elena has been on quite a journey," he told the judges. "I think you'll find her performance illuminating." One of the judges, a white-haired man with sharp eyes, looked at Elena with interest. "I understand you returned to playing after a long absence?" 15 years, Elena replied. "This competition gave me a reason to start again." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "The most difficult barriers to overcome are often the ones we create ourselves." The woman judge smiled. "We look forward to hearing you play." After reviewing the competition rules, each pianist would perform the full first movement, with scoring based on technical accuracy, interpretation, and overall mastery. Richard announced the performance order. Elena would play last. Outside, the audience had grown to nearly 200 people. News of Richard's unusual challenge had spread, attracting classical music enthusiasts, social media influencers, and curious neighbors. A small orchestra, hired to accompany the soloists, warmed up at the back of the stage. Elena spotted Lucia in the front row, sitting beside Tom. Surprisingly, Tom gave her an encouraging nod when their eyes met. Perhaps he had changed his mind about someone from her background. The competition began with William's performance. His playing was confident and precise, earning appreciative applause. Natalie followed with a thoughtful interpretation that occasionally struggled with the more technically demanding passages. Victor played with professional polish, but little emotion, while Grace's performance displayed remarkable technical skill, but lacked the depth that comes with life experience. When Alexandra took the stage, her playing was everything Elena had feared, nearly flawless, with both technical brilliance and emotional nuance. As the audience gave Alexandra a standing ovation, Elena felt her confidence wavering. How could she possibly follow that? She was still struggling with doubt when a staff member touched her arm. "You're on in 5 minutes, Ms. Vasquez." Elena nodded, took a deep breath, and walked to the side of the stage. From there, she could see Richard sitting with the judges, his expression unreadable. For the first time, she wondered what outcome he truly wanted from this competition. Did he hope one of the professional pianists would win, validating his challenge? Or had his interest in Elena's progress become something more personal? And what did she want? The answer came to her as she heard her name announced and walked onto the stage. She wanted to play, not to win a bizarre marriage contest, not to impress the judges or the audience, but to reconnect with the part of herself she had set aside years ago. As she sat at the piano and adjusted the bench, Elena looked out at the sea of faces. She found Lucia, who gave her a thumbs up. She saw Mrs. Chen in the third row. Her usual stern expression softened with anticipation. And she saw Richard leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that might have been unnerving if she hadn't come to understand him better over these past months. The orchestra began the opening notes. Elena took a deep breath and joined them, her fingers finding the keys with a certainty that surprised her. The familiar melody flowed from her hands, no longer a technical challenge to be conquered, but a story to be told. As she played, memories surfaced of her childhood home, where she first fell in love with music, of her music school years full of promise and ambition, of the difficult decision to leave it all behind for a more practical path, of Lucia growing up without knowing her mother's passion, and finally, of these past 3 months rediscovering what she had lost. The music became a vessel for these memories, giving them shape and voice. When she reached the cadenza, the extended solo section near the end of the movement, Elena closed her eyes and let the music take over. Her fingers moved across the keys not with the robotic precision of endless practice, but with the freedom that comes when technique serves emotion rather than the other way around. The final chords resonated across the lawn, hanging in the air for a breathless moment before the audience erupted in applause. Elena opened her eyes to see people rising to their feet. Lucia was jumping up and down, clapping wildly. Mrs. Chen was nodding with unmistakable approval. And Richard was standing perfectly still, a look of wonder on his face. As Elena stood and bowed, she felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever the judges decided, she had accomplished something more valuable than winning a competition. She had reclaimed her music. Backstage, the other contestants offered congratulations, even Alexandra giving a grudging nod of respect. "Where did you study?" she asked. "Before, I mean. The National Conservatory in my home country," Elena replied. "I was on track for a performance career, but life had other plans." "Well," Alexandra said, "you certainly made up for lost time." The judges took nearly an hour to deliberate, during which Elena sat with Lucia, both too nervous to eat the refreshments being served. Finally, Richard took the stage to announce the results. "Before I reveal the judges' decision," he began, "I want to thank all 6 contestants for their remarkable performances today. Rachmaninoff's Third is considered one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, and to prepare it in just 3 months is an extraordinary achievement." He paused, looking out over the audience. "When I proposed this challenge, many people thought it was just another of my eccentric whims. Perhaps it was, but it has become something more meaningful, a celebration of dedication, passion, and the transformative power of music." Richard opened the envelope containing the results. "The judges have made their decision. The winner of the competition is—" He paused, his eyes finding Elena in the front row. "Alexandra Pierce and Elena Vasquez." "We have a tie!" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Alexandra looked shocked. Elena couldn't process what she was hearing. "Both pianists demonstrated exceptional mastery of the piece," Richard continued. "Alexandra with her flawless technique and Elena with her profound emotional interpretation. The judges could not choose between them." Richard invited both women to join him on stage. As they stood on either side of him, he turned first to Alexandra. "Congratulations on your outstanding performance. Your years of training and dedication were evident in every note." Alexandra smiled triumphantly, clearly expecting to hear more about wedding plans next. But Richard turned to Elena. "And Elena, you reminded everyone here today, including me, why we listen to music in the first place. Not to appreciate technical perfection, but to feel something true." The audience applauded again. Elena felt dizzy with emotion. A tie? What did this mean for Richard's outrageous promise? As if reading her thoughts, Richard addressed the crowd once more. "Now about that marriage proposal." The crowd fell silent as Richard addressed the marriage proposal question. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Beside her, Alexandra stood perfectly straight, a confident smile on her face. "About that marriage proposal," Richard repeated, looking from one woman to the other. "I find myself in an unexpected situation." He turned to Alexandra first. "Your playing was technically brilliant. You've clearly dedicated your life to music." Alexandra's smile widened. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield. I look forward to discussing our future." A murmur rippled through the audience. Richard held up his hand for silence. "However," he continued, "a contest decided by judges wasn't what I originally proposed." He turned to address the crowd. "I said I would marry whoever could master Rachmaninoff's Third in 3 months. I never specified who would judge that mastery." Richard looked at Elena, his expression softer. "Elena, your journey these past 3 months has been remarkable. You've reminded me why this music matters, not as a technical challenge, but as an expression of the human spirit." Elena felt her cheeks warm. She was intensely aware of Lucia watching from the front row, of the hundreds of eyes on them, of Alexandra stiffening beside her. "The truth is," Richard said, his voice carrying across the hushed lawn, "neither of you will be marrying me today." The crowd gasped. Alexandra's face flushed with anger. "Excuse me?" she said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "You signed a contract. You made a promise." "I did," Richard nodded, "and I intend to keep it, just not in the way everyone expected." He gestured to his lawyer, who approached the stage with a document. "This is an amendment to the original agreement signed by me this morning." The lawyer handed Richard the paper. "Instead of marriage," Richard explained, "I'm establishing a foundation in both your names, the Pierce Vasquez Music Foundation. It will provide scholarships for talented musicians who face financial barriers to pursuing their dreams." Alexandra stared at him in disbelief. "A foundation? That's not what you promised." "The foundation will be funded with $20 million, Richard continued calmly. $10 million in each of your names to be used as you see fit for musical education and opportunities." The crowd began to murmur again, this time with excitement. Alexandra's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "In addition," Richard said, turning to Elena, "the foundation will fund a special program for adult musicians who had to set aside their training. Because talent doesn't disappear just because life gets in the way." Elena couldn't speak. The magnitude of what Richard was offering, not just to her but to others like her, was overwhelming. Richard addressed the audience once more. "My mother had to give up her musical dreams because of societal expectations. Today, financial barriers are often what stand in the way. This foundation aims to change that." He looked at Alexandra. "You have spent years perfecting your craft. Imagine what you could do for the next generation with the resources of this foundation." Alexandra's anger had faded, replaced by thoughtful consideration. "I would have full control over my portion." "Complete autonomy," Richard confirmed. "Use it to support whatever aspect of music education matters most to you." Alexandra nodded slowly. "I've always wanted to establish a masterclass program for gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds." "Now you can," Richard said. He turned to Elena, who still hadn't found her voice. "What about you, Elena? What would you do with your portion?" Elena thought of the community center where she used to play on the old out-of-tune piano, of all the people like her who had talent but no opportunity to develop it. "Music programs for working adults," she said finally. "People who think it's too late to follow their dreams." "Perfect," Richard smiled. "Then we have an agreement?" Alexandra considered for a moment, then extended her hand. "We do, Mr. Thornfield." After they shook hands, she turned to Elena. "Congratulations. Your playing today was inspiring." With that, she left the stage with perfect poise, stopping briefly to speak with the judges. As the crowd began to disperse toward the refreshment tables, Richard and Elena stepped away from the microphones. "You never intended to marry anyone, did you?" Elena asked quietly. Richard shrugged. "I meant what I said about keeping my word. But after I heard you play that first day when you thought no one was listening, I realized there could be a better outcome than some publicity stunt marriage. So all of this, the lessons, the practice time, the competition, it was all leading to this foundation?" "Not at first," Richard admitted. "The idea evolved as I watched your journey, as I saw what music meant to you, what it could mean to others in similar situations." Elena shook her head in wonder. "You're a very strange man, Richard Thornfield. I've been called worse," he laughed. Then more seriously, "Are you disappointed? That I don't have to marry a man I barely know?" Elena smiled. "Hardly. This is better than anything I could have imagined." Lucia bounded up to them, her face glowing with excitement. "Mom, you were amazing." "And you won. Well tied, but still." Elena hugged her daughter tightly. "Thanks to your support. I couldn't have done it without you." Lucia turned to Richard. "Thank you for giving my mom a chance. And for the piano. You have no idea what it meant to hear her play again." Richard seemed touched by her words. "You're very welcome. Your mother has remarkable talent." "She does," Lucia agreed proudly. "So what happens now? With the foundation and everything?" "There will be paperwork," Richard said. "Meetings with lawyers and financial advisors. Your mother will have a lot of decisions to make." Elena felt suddenly overwhelmed. "I don't know the first thing about running a foundation." "You'll learn," Richard assured her. "And I'll help if you want." Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Not the theatrical romance of his original proposal, but something quieter, with the potential to grow into something real. The celebration continued into the evening. As the sun began to set, lanterns illuminated the garden and the orchestra played softly in the background. Elena found herself sitting on a bench near the rose garden, watching the guests mingle. Richard appeared with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to her. "To new beginnings," he said. Elena clinked her glass against his. "To music." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their champagne. "I have a confession," Richard said finally. "I've sold the Tokyo office." "Why?" Elena asked, surprised. "I thought that was your biggest international location." "It was," Richard nodded. "But I've realized lately that I've been building an empire without any real purpose. It was time to reassess my priorities." "And what are those priorities now?" Richard looked out at the garden, where Lucia was chatting animatedly with Mrs. Chen. "Finding meaning, creating something that matters, maybe even learning to play the piano properly." He glanced at her with a small smile. "I could use a good teacher." "Mrs. Chen would be perfect," Elena teased. "I was thinking of someone with a bit more patience," Richard replied, his eyes holding hers. Elena felt a flutter of anticipation. "I could probably fit you into my schedule, though I hear I'll be quite busy with this new foundation." "We could discuss it over dinner," Richard suggested. "Not as employer and employee, not as contest judge and contestant. Just as 2 people getting to know each other." "Dinner?" Elena repeated, considering. "That sounds possible." Richard's smile widened. "I'll take possible." 6 months later, the Pierce Vasquez Music Foundation held its first official event, a benefit concert at the city's most prestigious music hall. Elena, dressed in an elegant blue gown, stood at the podium addressing the audience. "Music has always been more than just notes on a page," she said. "It's a language that speaks directly to the heart, a language that knows no barriers of age, background, or circumstance." In the front row, Lucia beamed with pride. Beside her sat Richard, watching Elena with undisguised admiration. "Today, we celebrate the launch of 2 programs," Elena continued. "The Alexandra Pierce Young Musicians Initiative, providing training for gifted children, and the Second Chance program for adults returning to music after life's detours." Alexandra, now the foundation's co-director, nodded approvingly from her seat near the stage. "None of this would be possible without Richard Thornfield," Elena acknowledged. His unusual challenge led to an even more unusual solution. The audience laughed, familiar with the story that had been covered extensively in the media. "And now," Elena concluded, "I'm honored to introduce our first scholarship recipients who will perform for you tonight." As she took her seat next to Richard, he squeezed her hand. "Nervous about your performance later?" he whispered. Elena shook her head. "Not anymore." After the scholarship recipients performed, it was Elena's turn. As she sat at the piano, she caught Richard's eye. In the 6 months since the competition, their relationship had evolved slowly and carefully. Weekly piano lessons had turned into dinners, which had turned into theater outings and long walks in the park. They were taking their time, building something real. Elena began to play, not Rachmaninoff this time, but Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece she had played for Richard that first day when he caught her at his mother's piano. As the familiar melody filled the hall, Elena thought about the strange path that had led her here. A cleaner who overheard a millionaire's whim, a forgotten talent reclaimed, a competition that ended in an unexpected tie, and a foundation that would give others the chance she had almost missed. When the piece ended, Elena stood to thunderous applause. Richard was the first on his feet, his eyes never leaving hers as she took her bow. Later that night, as they walked through the quiet streets after the post-concert reception, Richard took her hand. "I have a question," he said. "No contracts, no lawyers, no audience." Elena looked at him curiously. "What kind of question?" "The kind that begins with dinner tomorrow night at that little Italian restaurant you like. Just the 3 of us. You, me, and Lucia." That sounds more like an invitation than a question, Elena pointed out. Richard stopped walking and turned to face her. The question comes after dinner, but it starts with this. He leaned in and kissed her softly. When they parted, Elena smiled. I think I might say yes to that question. Good, Richard said, taking her hand again as they continued walking. Because unlike my last proposal, this one will be just between us. No audience, no competition. No Rachmaninoff required? Elena teased. No Rachmaninoff required, Richard confirmed, though I wouldn't object if you wanted to play it at our wedding. Elena laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet street. Let's get through dinner first. As they walked on, hand in hand, Elena thought about the strange and wonderful way life could change when you least expected it. A passing comment overheard while cleaning. A childhood passion rekindled. A second chance at dreams long forgotten. And perhaps, most unexpectedly of all, a love story that began with a challenge and a piano.